Welcome to this session. Nate obviously is going to be your presenter. He's been teaching elementary physical education in Southern California for about 20 years. He also serves as his district's teacher lead for the elementary PE program. He's a deep thinker with regard to the philosophies of physical education and education as a whole. He's written several widely read articles and is a regular speaker for various universities and organizations, both nationally and internationally. You can follow and engage in some deep conversations with Nate on Twitter at Coach Nate B. All right, Nate.
Thank you, Tina.
Sure thing.
All right, let me share my screen here. Okay, everybody, you can see that, right? I can't see faces there. Okay, I saw Larry's thumbs up, so that works. So this is, just to give you a little heads up, this particular format here, this presentation, this was kind of based on something I did recently. I was lucky enough to do a webinar with Margaret Whitehead, the person who sort of made the term physical literacy popular. I had written an article, and Nigel Green from the International Physical Literacy Association, the IPLA, he had read it and then had passed it on to Margaret Whitehead, and she had read it and they enjoyed it and they wanted to chat. So we chatted for a couple hours. They liked what I had to say and they wanted other people to hear what I had to say. And so they arranged for a webinar with the IPLA and where I spoke for a little bit, and then Margaret came in and had a response, and then we spoke in breakout rooms and things like that. So this is similar to a presentation I recently did for them, but I did change it up a little bit for this. So this one, it's, this rethinking and redefining physical education here, this conference. And what I wanted to do was talk about rethinking the what's, the whys, and the hows of physical education. And so the big thing for me is that we have the wrong what's, whys, and hows for the most part. And so I'll unpack that here. So a little context though. Okay, so this is, I'm coming from an elementary PE teacher perspective, but I also see secondary education around me in my context, and see what's out there in the general discourse around my local context and the American context. But what I'm doing is I'm speaking from a public education perspective and within an explicitly democratic society. So I'm looking at physical education as a public school subject. People will say physical education occurs outside of school. Absolutely, it does. Education occurs outside of school for sure. But I'm talking explicitly about public school subject physical education here. And as I said, this is within an explicitly democratic society. And thinking about democracy here as a way of life, not necessarily a political system, which is based on political and civic equality, social justice, the common good, and general welfare, right? You can't ever really have a democracy or finally reach a democracy. It is a way, it is a process. And our country is unique in the sense that we sort of began, well, I don't know that I would say began, but we sort of officially began with the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence announces at the very beginning of it in the preamble what we are supposed to be about. And they're really big aspirations. And what they essentially announced at that point was something like, look, everybody's equal in terms of their desire to be well, right? They're endowed with these inalienable rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And what they were saying is everybody is equal in terms of that. We're all trying to be well. And so the best way to make that happen is to work together, is to do it as equals, and then we consent. It's government by the consent of equals. And so we could call that democracy. I think it's a good way of calling it. Now, we've never had a democracy, and even the democracy we have today, in a sense, is can be pretty messed up at times. It isn't very democratic. But the point is to always have more democracy, more democracy. That's the point. Always have more democracy. So that's where I'm speaking here. So anything outside of physical education, within public education, in an explicitly democratic society, I don't have anything worthwhile to say, because I could only ground my approach in my particular context, which is an American context. So we have this national or federal overreach, right? We're the United States. We're united around something. What are we united around? It isn't just land. It's ideas. It's a commitment. It's a commitment to something like social justice and the general welfare, the common good. And the Declaration of Independence announces it. That's what we're united around. So even though education is a local and a state thing, it's still bound by these sort of national dreams in a sense, right? We're supposed to embody that as public educators, that whatever we're united around, that commitment. So I'm going to skip this one here. Let me just get right into this, because what I'd like to do, and I hope more people join as time goes on here, but what I'd like to do is save some good amount of time at the end for questions and just discussion. And I'm actually going to scroll through and look and see if anybody else has joined, just maybe a couple. So here we go. The first thing here, and just to give you a heads up, I actually wanted the red side of this to start first, not the green, but I forgot to reformat it. So you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. But so the wrong words, we use the wrong words. The words we use don't actually match what we do or should do. Okay, so in PE, the words that we use don't actually match what we do or should do. So the words we should actually use. Now, like I said, I wanted to start with this red side. The red side is what we typically do and what I typically think is wrong. And the green is going to come up first, which is the stuff that I think we should be doing. But I'll just go with it. So here's what we should be using. We should actually be using physical education. That's what we should be using, or what I would say is body or soma aesthetic. And soma aesthetic just means like aesthetic as in feeling. And then soma is somatic, which just means body. But I really love the word somatic because it refers to the body as a lived body. It's not just a body like a biomedical body. It's the lived body, the soma, right? In philosophy, they call it. So what we really should be is a physical education, but that's not what we do in practice. Okay, that's not what we do in practice. So we should change our name to match what we do in practice, but I actually think that we should change our practice to match our name. So we should actually be physical or body, because I think that's what the physical actually means. It means body. Just a little thing here. We have physical science in school, and we have physical education. Are those two words physical there, the same word? Is it really the same thing? Do they mean the same thing? They don't, right? They don't mean the same thing. They mean something different. So what does the physical in physical education typically mean? Well, it refers to the body. That's what it is. But we have to think differently about the body, and we'll get to that later. So the words that we should use to describe ourselves would be physical education, actually. Now, look, two of these words, they won't stick, like soma aesthetic or corporeal, and that's what corporeal just means body, essentially. They won't stick. Nobody's going to call ourselves soma aesthetic or somatic or corporeal education. Nobody's going to do that. And so we can call ourselves like body education, but body is a term that's pretty loaded too. It may lend itself to body as machine thinking. So physical may be the best term that we could use to describe what we do, but it still needs further definition because what it really means is body. Let's be honest. Now, physical, it's a broad term that transcends and includes movement or physical activity. We tend to think of physical, well, let me get to that later here. So education is a broad term as well, but this depends on how it's conceived. So let's get, and this green frame here is a wider, more inclusive frame. So what I'm gonna do when I get to the red, we'll come back to the green a little bit. But what I'm talking about in the green here, this is a more wider, more inclusive frame. It can be called education actually, and lends itself to more democratic approaches. Now this will make sense as we get to the red. All right, so here are the words that actually better describe what we do in practice. Okay, we are more of a physical activity education than we are a physical education, right? We are more of movement education than we are physical education. Because think about it, when we talk about PE, and I just heard a session just a minute ago where it was a physical educator, and I kept hearing movement, 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 as though PE is only movement. But you'll listen to us talk about physical education in terms of movement or physical activity. So we're not actually, if all we're doing is physical activity or movement, then we're not physical education, are we? We're physical activity education or movement education. That better describes what we do, I think. Now, I don't think that's what we should do. I think we have to include physical activity and movement, of course. But I think actually that we need to open up our practice. But based on what we do, a better word for what we do would be physical activity education or movement education, or health and physical activity education. That would better describe us, because we do talk about health, or we'll talk about nutrition. And that's a whole other thing, by the way. I don't think we should actually be quite invested into quote unquote health and nutrition in our subject. And think about this too. Why is it that physical education deals with nutrition and health, but not math, not history, not art, not any other subject? Why is only physical education the subject that incorporates nutrition and health? Well, that's because we have very superficial conceptions of health and the body. And you see how we meld those two together, right? You can look at somebody's health by looking at their body. So physical education, essentially, it perpetuates this notion that you get healthy through the body, in the sense that you exercise it and you train it and you make it healthy, you make it fit. So PE in this country, in the United States, it tends to be a health intervention via physical activity. Okay, so let's stop there for a second and compare the red and the green. So we, in practice, are more of a physical activity education, or a movement education, or a health and physical activity education. In practice, we are not physical education. We should be, though. We should be physical education. And again, this is a health intervention, right? Via physical activity. We are going to make people healthy. They need to. We've decided, right, that they have to be healthy. They need to be healthy for their lifetime. In order to do that, they have to move. And so we've decided for them what they must be. And you look at our national organization, and it's called SHAPE America. I mean, it tells you all you need to know about our vision right there. We need to shape people, form them into a shape. And I don't think that's a good approach, right? Our class is not a health intervention. If it were, then just hire physical trainers, personal trainers. Hire people pretty cheaply, and they can come in and they can just get kids moving to be fit, to be healthy. Just do that then. You don't need credentialed educators to do that. So this is too narrow of a frame. It is a training and disciplining of bodies. It's not an education. If we are physical education, and actually I should really change in the red there, it shouldn't be physical activity education, it should be physical activity training or something like that. If we are going to be about education, it can't be about training and disciplining of bodies. You must be this way, you must act this way, you must look this way, you must move this way, and you must do this for a lifetime. We've decided for you. That's not education, that's training and that's disciplining. And I don't think that's a good way of educating people. So wrong words, right? We actually don't use the right words to describe what we do in practice. But we should still use the term physical and education, but then we need to change our practice so that we are physical education, not a health intervention via physical activity or nutrition or whatever. All right, here's the other thing. We got the wrong words, but we also have the wrong purposes and aims. The wrong purposes and aims. So we need aims that actually work for each person, others, and the whole. Now, what I mean by that is, if you've ever seen something like student-centered, right? Student-centered approach, student-centered is still too narrow of an approach. School is not for each person, because we all actually contribute to public schooling, don't we? With school, with public schooling, what we have to keep in mind is not just the person, but others and the whole. Always. That's who public school represents, in a sense. Each person, others, and the whole. And you don't sacrifice each one for the other. You constantly work on all three of those dimensions: the person, others, and the whole. We have to juggle those things, right? So we need aims that work for each person, others, and the whole. All right, so this green part will make, actually, let me just skip to the red and then I'll go back to the green. So let's do that. So our typical aims would be like a healthy, physically active lifestyle. If you ask a lot of PE people, what do you want of your students when they're older? Oh, I want them to be healthy, lifelong movers. So again, PE is reduced to movement, and the point of movement is so that they are healthy, right? Physically active. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make them so that they're always physically active, so that they're healthy. We've decided for them in advance. So this is our typical aims: healthy, physically active lifestyle, or like SHAPE says, the physically literate individual. which I totally disagree with. I think every individual is physically literate. You can't finally become physically literate. And if you think that, you're going to have to tell me at what point you cross that line. Where do you actually cross the line and now you're physically literate? You're not going to be able to do that. So we shouldn't speak of the physically literate individual. They're all physically literate. What we could do is enhance their physical literacy. But if we have physically literate individuals, we have physically illiterate individuals. And I don't think we do. Because if you're alive and you're breathing and you're moving at all in any sort of way, then you're using physical literacy. You can't help but be physically literate in your own way, to your own degree, based on your context. So we should not be in the business of deciding what people should be, right? We shouldn't decide what and how they should be, especially far in the future, and where they should be this. So if you think about what we typically do in PE, everything we do is like, you need to know these things and do these things, these quote unquote skills, these packages of these pre-existing things that have no context. And it's like we're going to deposit them in you, and then you'll have them, and I'll test you to see if you have them, and you use them. You use them over there. You're going to use them on the field or in the gym. And those are the things you must know, because we've decided for you what you must be. You've got to be healthy. We've decided for you. So for me, I think that that is not a good approach. It's too exclusive. We should not be in the business of deciding what and how people should be. Again, that would be a training and a disciplining of bodies that only represents some people's interests, by the way, not all people's interests. It disregards the students' interests and goals and meanings. And this is PE as a journey. And I understand that some people use this term journey like, no, I don't mean it as a journey to a destination. I just mean the whole process is a journey. Yes, I get that. When you look back on it, it's a journey. But let's try, instead of talking about a journey, we can look over there at the green really quick. We would see an adventure. To me, it's an adventure, not a journey. There is no predefined destination. This isn't the correct way. There are all these different ways. What way works for you? What do you think? You don't have to love it either. Like, I know we want our students to love PE or love movement or whatever it would be, love their bodies and other people's bodies, but they don't have to love it. That's for them to decide. We don't have to force that, but we can engage in certain ways. And the byproduct of that, a nice byproduct would be value and appreciation and things like that. But these would be our typical aims here, right? Healthy, physically active lifestyle. We've decided for you. You need to be a physically literate individual. We will design the entire scope and sequence, K through 12, all these grade level outcomes and standards. We're going to design all this stuff around this goal that we've decided, not you, we've decided that's what you must be. And as I've kind of hinted toward, this is too prescriptive. It's exclusive, and it really squanders the potential of our subject. Because think about this too. While we are getting better as a subject nationally here, we still have, I still see way too much stuff like running the mile on Wednesdays and grading people on their mile times, and this overemphasis on fitness testing. And there's a lot of students that just, they don't feel at home in the class because of the way their body is or how it performs, right? And they don't like PE. How is that possible? How is our subject not the best part of anybody's day? And I know in some cases it will be, but still, even when it is enjoyable, it can't be about, this is the goal for the future for you. You must be able to agree to this and then do this. I'll make it fun for you, but it's up to them what they do with it. So let's go to the better aims here. Rather than healthy, physically active lifestyle or the physically literate individual, the point of all schools should be living well together. And what do I ground that in? Well, that goes back to the Declaration of Independence. Those are essentially the moral foundations of this country. And as Martin Luther King said, it's a promissory note. We're always trying to make good on it, right? We're trying to embody more of those ideals every day. And so living well together, that's the point of school. And our subject is through the expression, the expansion, and the coordination of our, let's say, physical and embodied capabilities. So it's through these physical or embodied or somatic practices that we develop. Okay, so the point of PE is to, number one, really give space and time to develop our capabilities that want to be developed. As humans, we want to develop our capabilities. That's what we are. We're a creative organism that needs to constantly create and exercise our potential, right? Carl Rogers called that the actualizing tendency. So
Nate, I just
we
have a
provide
question.
space for that. What's that?
I just have a question. I'm just trying to frame where you're coming from, and I think, you know, I'm looking and or I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking of the philosophy. The foundation is moving from a objective subjective
Mhm.
perspective frame towards a constructivist postmodern philosophy. Is that correct?
I mean, you could call it that. I would think that I wouldn't want it to be limited by any particular frame, but sure, you could even call it a, rather than, I mean, one way of calling it wouldn't even be a constructivist postmodern, but you could call it a constructive postmodern. That's
Okay.
one way, you know, because there's deconstructive and constructive, and then everybody's got different ideas on what that all
Right.
means and this and that. So it really depends on what your view of constructivism is or
Hmm.
postmodernism is. So it depends on what kind you're working with there.
I just think that the lens itself is really fascinating. This is very interesting.
Well, thank you. And as I get to the next section too, it'll start to maybe make a little bit more sense. And then this is where I really want to get into some questions with everybody here. Um, so, so again, it's not that we need them to become anything. It's that we need to provide the opportunities for them to become in their own ways. But we do it through this particular medium, through this dimension of the body, essentially, right? It's like math. Math is for living well together. Science is for living well together, or should be. But we do it through that medium. It's not to say you need to be a good sciencer, a good mather, a good whatever, right? It's we need to live well together. And whatever that means, we have to decide. Well, that's living well looks different from person to person. But what we'll do is we'll enhance your capacity to live well together through these different mediums. And what that looks like in the end, it's wide open. The one thing you can't do is harm others without their consent. Now, by the way, in my class, we have one law. That's it. We don't have a bunch of rules, but we have one law, and that law is do no harm. You cannot harm anybody without their informed consent. And we trace that back to the Declaration of Independence. And then we do have one additional step we'd like to go to, which would be take care of each other. So we talk about you cannot harm. And other than that, you have all these rights to do all these things. You have the right to not consent in my class. You have the right to resist if you want. But what we try to do is engage in conversation so we can meet each other's needs. I can correspond with them and work with them as a partnership, not as a dictator or a director. That always will depend upon the age level, of course. But so ideally, we well, at the very minimum, you cannot harm, but ideally we take care of each other. So we do try to facilitate that too. But if somebody decides I don't want to take care of each other, they have that choice. So going back to that middle portion there, we should not be in the business of deciding what they should be. Think about it the other way. The engagement in our subject through these practices, the engagement transforms self, others, and the whole, right? Because we're always concerned about the self, others, and the whole on their own terms rather than our preferred ones. And this shows up everywhere in life. It shows up everywhere, not just on a team or for fitness or something like that. It shows up in like just juggling itself. Juggling itself translates to the just anywhere in the world because it enhances your capability as an organism. It's a different view of the world. It's a different view of the self. You don't have to juggle in PE to be good at juggling. You juggle in PE to find out what juggling means to you. What did you think of it? To possibly transform their perception, right? There's all sorts of different ways of doing these things, but juggling, no matter what, it will transform them somehow. On top of that, with assessment, if it's an adventure, we just want to trace the adventure. We want to reflect on the adventure, and then we could plan together where we might want to go next. But what was it like? How's the journey been or the adventure been so far? Remember, looking back is a journey, but overall, it's an adventure. And by the way, when it's an adventure too, all different ways of traveling, wayfinding, wayfaring, I love those terms, they're all valid. The way that we typically engage in PE, only these ways are valid. You have to do it like this. You have to learn to throw like this because that's the correct way. I'm here to tell you there is no correct way of throwing. This mature pattern is not correct. It works well for certain types of outcomes, and we would be wise to talk to students about that. But we should never say, here's how you throw. This is the correct way of throwing. Now I'm going to grade you based on how well you match this model. I don't think that works very well because, first of all, that's not the correct way of throwing. If a student says, I just want to have fun, here's how I throw, who are we to say you're wrong? You should throw like this. I think that's anti-democratic, actually. But of course, that's not how PE tends to operate, is it? So this is more inclusive, more effective. It unlocks our potential. All right, on to the next one. And I want to go a little faster maybe so we can get to some questions. All right, so we have the wrong words. We have the wrong aims and purposes. And then with the words we actually use, we have the wrong conceptions of them. Okay, they're too reductive. So let me fast forward here and get to this one. So physical, what does that mean? Well, in PE, it means physical activity typically, right? We're not physical education, we're physical activity education, let's be honest. But if, like I said earlier, is it physical science, physical education? Does the physical mean the same thing there? No, because what does it probably mean? It means body. So a better term would be physical. Let's look over in the green now. So physical, rather than being physical activity, it should mean body. But now we're gonna look below here in a second to see what I mean by body. But I really love the term somatic or soma aesthetic, or corporeal just means bodily. But intercorporeal, it's always, our bodies are always in between and interpenetrating other bodies. It's never just an isolated body that bumps into other bodies. It doesn't work like that. So our conception of body, well, in PE, we tend to be working with the body as an object or a machine that somebody, corrals and directs in order to meet these specifications. That's the biomedical body that we need to make fit and we need to make healthy. That's not the kind of body we should be working with, or that's not the conception of body we should be working with. Instead, let's look over here at the green. Body as a lived in relational body, right? We are bodies, and bodies are these dynamic processes, right? They're patterns of relations. Like if you zoomed into anything, if you zoomed into a body, you see all these different things, right? Like cells, but if you zoom into a cell, you see all the organelles, but if you zoom into the organelles, you keep going, you get to like protons, electrons, and quarks, and all these things. And if you look, there's nothing really solid there. There's all this quote unquote space between energy that's interacting with other energetic forms. And so that's what all life is. All life forms are essentially patterns of energetic relations, right? So a body is this particular pattern, but it's a process. But it's a process of relations. Now we experience, so if you looked at the lived in relational body, we experience life through and as a body. And our body is a source of living for other bodies as well. So the body is always affective, right? And affecting. It's a subject and an object. And it's even an object for myself because I can sort of reflect on how I feel. So in a sense, it is an object for me as well, but it's also, I'm a subject as a body. So rather than a biomedical body that we must train, that we must discipline in order to be productive for coaches or whomever, we need to be concerned with how a body is lived, how it experiences, and then how it contributes to other people's living, right? Self, others, and the whole. Now, education. We typically see education as training for jobs or productive life, right? Schools for jobs. Go ask kids, what's school for? Eventually, they'll tell you if you keep asking them questions. You go to school to go to college, to get a degree, to get a job, not just any job, a good job. And what's a good job? One that makes good money. And what's good money? One that buys you a nice car and a nice house. Those are the top two things they'll all tell you. So school is just a hoop that you must jump through to get nice stuff. School is for college and career readiness, right? It's for jobs. That's the way school is typically conceived in this country. Imagine if students don't turn in their work or they're not being responsible. What do we always say? Do we say, well, this will hurt us politically. You will not relate well with others. No, we say things like your boss will fire you, or do you want fries with that? Like we always relate it to jobs, right? School in this country is for jobs. It shouldn't be. It should be for democracy before it's for jobs. So education, what it should be, the way we should conceive of it as expression, expansion, and the coordination of capabilities for living well together. That's what an education is. So that looks different, by the way, than schooling for jobs. Schooling for jobs says, be this way. Education for capabilities for living well together is we can be lots of different ways. Let's be this way. Let's try this way. What happens when we're like this? What happens when we're like this? And then we slow down, we dialogue more, we debate more, we create more, we experiment more. We don't have time to do that in school, do we? Because you got to know these things, you got to do these things. And that that inhibits democracy more than it helps it, to be honest with you. Now, physical literacy, that concept, right, that term, or the physically literate individual, we always talk about the healthy, physically active, competent mover who has the confidence, all that stuff. Forget about that. Don't think of physical literacy that way. Let's think of it this way. It's a capacity to engage with the world using the embodied dimension. It's not limited to health or movement. And the hope is to enhance this capacity for more fluent and productive engagement with the world. That's the point. That's what education is for, living well together, right? That's fluent and productive engagement. And Margaret Whitehead herself even defines physical literacy that way. Then she settles on the other definition that talks about competence, confidence, knowledge, and understanding. And that's a mistake, I think. Okay, what about health? So health, we typically look at, if we're using the biomedical body, right? We look at health as a lack of disease or obesity or something like that. Rather than that, let's look at health differently. Health is the capacity to engage productively with self, others, and the whole. Remember, we always have to keep those three in mind. Health is the capacity to engage productively, or fluently even, with self, others, and the whole, for the benefit of each of those simultaneously, which is hard to do. That's why you have to communicate with each other, right? So health is this capacity to engage productively. It's not you look this way, you do these things. It's a little bit more open-ended than that. And then the same kind of thing with fitness. We tend to look at fitness as like this athleticism or competence or being in shape, healthy, etc. Well, if you look at the green here, really fitness to me is the degree of fit between self, others, and a particular whole or context, right? A good example of this would be, Maslow asked, what sort of level of health would we say that a Nazi soldier would have as he marches people into a furnace? What level of health would that person have if they could do something like that? Like, to me, that's not a good fit, is it? That's not a good fit. That's not a capacity to engage productively with self, others, and the whole. That's not a good fit between self, others, and a particular whole or context. So regardless of what their cholesterol levels are like, their body fat percentage is like, lack of disease or whatever, that's not health. Even if we can say, well, they're physically healthy, there's no such thing as physically healthy, because health is never located in one spot. It's always distributed throughout the systems. We can look at particular parts of the system, but it's never just merely located here. There's the health of that system right there. It's all intertwined. Now, I don't know that everybody's going to be adopting these types of conceptions. I don't know how they're going to. The only way for me, I think, is our PEAT programs, the education that future teachers get at the college level, needs to change their approach. And I think we need to be saying different things in conferences and in the general discourse. But that's going to be hard to change, I think. And this is the last part here. So this is an image from a book called Unflattening by a guy named Nick Susanis. This is actually his PhD dissertation out of Columbia University, this image right here. And it's an amazing book. I recommend everybody get it. But you'll see, let's just start with the image here. Level upon level. I'm in the top left corner. If you can't see this, I'm just going to read it. Level upon level. And if you see, it's like a conveyor belt with people on it, right? Interchangeable. Level upon level, they pass through an elaborate sequence of discrete steps, a recipe of add this, mold that. Every procedure is designed to ensure that proper results are achieved. And so you see shape over here, setting students on the road, right? Producing physically literate individuals, setting students on the road to enjoying a lifetime of healthful physical activity. Again, I don't know that that's education right there, is it? That's telling people what they must become. I don't know that that's education. That's training. That's disciplining. And then you might see this word habitus down here in the red, physical activity habitus. Habitus is, Pierre Bourdieu is a sociologist. He coined the term habitus. He made it popular, at least. And habitus is just a way of doing and being and kind of internalizing, the general ways of doing and being of the society you're in or whatever. So physical literacy, the way they're describing physical literacy here, that's not physical literacy. That's what we would call a physical activity habitus. They're saying you should have the ability, the confidence, and the desire to be physically active for life. We're going to make sure, we're going to try to give you the ability, the confidence, and desire to be physically active for life. Now look, on the surface, this all looks great. It looks so innocent. And that's the danger of it, because it's a lot of people deciding for others what they must become, how they must become it, and then controlling the entire process for them at the school level, and pretending as though it's the truth, when all this stuff is debatable and arguable, but we just don't debate it and argue it enough. Now, of course, I do. If you know me, I definitely do. And I do get a decent amount of flack for raising some issues sometimes. But I think we really do need to question what we do. Because we just, even when it looks good and we think we're doing a better job because we're going to make everything so linear, scope, sequence, here's the learning outcome for the lesson, and it's all going to align with these standards and grade level outcomes. How many grade level outcomes could we possibly have, though? We only have so many, but there could be a ton. Why do we only have those? Why is it that we only have those standards? Why not other ones? So somebody narrowed the possibilities already, and we've sort of just went with it. We complied. Oh yeah, sure, this is the way it should be. It's not the way it should be. This is the way it's actively been constructed. So we need to, in a sense, what I'm doing here is deconstructing it, showing you it doesn't have to be this way. It could be better. It could be more. So this is the last image here, at least I think it is. And this is also from Nick's book here. And I love what he's doing here. You look at these footsteps. So starting in the left, rather than funneling our time here down narrow paths, which is what I think we tend to do in PE and mostly all of education, following a series of prescribed steps, right? Let us open this out. And then as you move to the right side of the page there, and see what possibilities emerge when we author paths as uniquely our own as our feet themselves, in shoe sizes determined by the wearer. This is what we don't do in PE. We determine like the shoes and the path for them. We shouldn't. Now look, we have the responsibility of providing the context for the adventure, the conditions for the adventure. But what they do with it, how they accept that gift, where they go with it, that's up to them. And this is a conversation for another time, but by thinking in these terms, and this is thinking more democratically, this is giving more student voice and choice in the whole process here. By thinking in these terms, it fundamentally changes assessment, it changes grading, it changes the way that we provide the conditions. Rather than saying, here's the learning outcome for the day, we can say, I don't know what the learning outcome for the day is. We're experimenting today. What can we come up with? What can we do? What is it like? What do you think? We're going to have a whole lot less right and wrong answers, because all the answers can be right and wrong to a degree, depending on their purposes and aims and things like that. So rather than physical education as a physical activity education, if you look at the red arrows, that's what we do. We constrain physical activity education for a healthy, physically active body. That's what it does. It constrains. But we should be physical education, not physical activity education, for enhanced enjoyment and healthy engagement with self, others, and the whole. And we do it through our practices, not because we need to make them a certain way, but because the way that we do things will enhance their ability to be themselves and to be with others. So what I wanted to do here was finish with a couple questions, really. Number one, just how do you think this all relates? Just thinking about this conference here, how does this all relate to everything I've just said about PE? How does this all relate to or align with like LTAD, sport, etc.? And then the second question would essentially be something like, what should PE's role be for the wider physical culture? So like if you have sport organizations that come in and say, oh, PE, we think PE should be like this, or like what you see with long-term athletic development people, they'll say, here's a vertically aligned PE, K through 12 vertically aligned PE. So what I'm curious as to how they look at PE and say its role should be like this. Like what is the role they think PE should be? But considering everything I've just said, So first thing, and please, anybody, everybody, just speak up and let's talk. How does all this relate to or maybe align with LTAD, sport, etc.? Or even, do you have any questions about how it could align with it, or if it even doesn't?
Hey, Nate, I have a question, if you
Yes,
don't
Artie.
mind. So, and it's not going to relate to your questions, but I do have a question. So, can you tell, because I missed the first part.
Mhm.
I'm late. I was a latecomer. Could you tell me a little bit about your background? Number one, a little bit about your background, personal philosophy, how you got there, number two, and how you grade your students. A little bit about your background, how you got there, and how do your students get A, B, C, D, F?
Well, they definitely don't get Fs, that's for sure, and they don't get Ds, and they don't get Cs usually. So actually, they don't even get A's or B's because we use different sorts, like citizenship grades in our district, and they're all going to be. It's fairly, it's typically self-assessment, and it's a partnership. So I work with them to develop grades. It isn't just me issuing a grade based on their meeting of any sort of objective criteria, because all grading is subjective. Even if you look at a standard and like a grade level outcome, and you take, like an action like throwing, you break it down into critical elements, and you have a rubric, and then you see if they've met these things. None of that is objective. It's all subjective because somebody chose, the teacher chose that standard instead of a different one. And then you design the rubric. It's all completely subjective. It's not objective at all. What makes it objective is when the student and I agree, and then that's what makes it objective. What makes anything objective is for the most part when people agree. That's what objectivity is in sort of this human realm, is this what we would call intersubjective agreement. If we've agreed that we should be nice to each other, then we can objectively assess whether or not we're being nice. If we've said, yeah, this is being nice to each other, we agree, we can then say, this objectively is not nice because we've agreed. But in the grand scheme of things, we can't do that. My background, elementary PE teacher for about 20 years, Southern California. Been like the coordinator of our district's elementary PE program for a little over 10 years, teacher lead, something like that. I coached high school basketball for about 20 years also. I don't coach anymore. I feel like I'm forgetting one of your questions. So background, my personal philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is just going to be way too hard to articulate here, but I think I'm trying to articulate it in this session here, in the sense that at least in terms of our role as educators, it begins in the vision of this country for these inalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for all people. And that's our job. Our job is to create those conditions.
So you sound like a younger version of Rudy Benton to me. Do you know Rudy?
Mm-mm.
He is an elementary PE teacher in Northern California. Rudy, I'm going to say, is probably close to 82 or 83. His style, his thinking is very much aligned with your style and your thinking. So to me, you're a younger version of Rudy Benton. The problem is there aren't enough of you and there aren't enough of Rudy Bentons to make this forceful enough to make a dramatic change across, not even in California, across the country. So,
but you're all here. So everybody in this session, they could be creatively maladjusted. I love that term, right? Creatively maladjusted. We can only, it's that the story of the person walking down the seashore, right? And they pick up the, what creature is it? They're picking up and throwing it back in the ocean.
Starfish.
Yeah.
Starfish.
And, the comment is, oh, that's not going to make a difference. Well, it made a difference for that one. So wherever and whenever you can be creatively maladjusted and embody something different, that's our job. But you're right. It's a big behemoth. It's too hard to change it all in a snap, like Thanos does with that Infinity Gauntlet. You can't do that. It's slow, it's bottom up. And And that's why, you know, what Michael has done with this and putting this together, it helps. Just the more people can just hear different ways of approaching things, I think the better it is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I just tend to take a look at the world systemically, and, you know, good ideas never die, right? It's hard to kill a good idea. However, you and I may be dead before that idea begins to flourish. And it might be nicer to be able to actually see it flourish in our lifetimes. But that's
Right.
all. I just wanted to get some background. And where did you go to undergraduate school, Nate?
Cal State Fullerton.
Okay, cool. I went to Cal State LA.
Oh, nice.
Many years ago. So anyway, I know where that is.
Right. So anybody on that first question there? How does this all relate to LTAD or sports? Does it relate? Or just any general questions you may have?
I don't know if this is a question or if it's just a comment, but if I think about how we typically, or some people typically view PE versus how a classroom teacher views their classroom. I mean, I've known so many PE teachers who seem to, it's like they just think their job is to create athletes. And so like when they identify someone as not an athlete, you know, the focus goes towards the kids who have a chance, so to speak, of, you know, being something or becoming something. Whereas, I mean, and I can't speak from the classroom perspective, but I would like to think that the classroom teacher is focused on not thinking, I'm going to make this person become a scientist, or I'm not going to make this person become a mathematician. Sort of like you think of, you know, increasing their capabilities.
Right. Yeah, I think we tend to think like our students, we want them to be good at things, where I don't know that all the classroom teachers necessarily are aiming for, you know, this strong competence. I think that some of them probably just want them to be able to use it in their life. Now, there's still different issues we have in every single classroom and every single subject with our pedagogy and our reasons for actually even teaching the subject in the first place. You know, I think there's a lot of incoherence with our own views of like the aims of education, which is natural. I mean, there's difference and diversity, right? You're not going to have the same, but I think it helps to get clear. You know, I don't want to limit what we can do in PE's name. I want to open up what we can do in PE's name, but PE would not be, you know, sitting down at a bench playing Legos all day, every day, and we would say it's physical education. We know that's not physical education, but we know that only doing something like fitness type things, or only playing games, or only playing sports, we know that's not necessarily just physical education either. There's more we can do. So the task is to find, you know, these open-ended outcomes and this really loose identity, or like a soft core, you know, that's pretty fluid and flexible, but it still retains some sort of identity that makes us unique in who we are. And that's why I say, what subject? I mean, you think about math as a tool. History is a tool, right? Our body is kind of a tool in a sense. It's our tool of tools. And what subject do we have devoted to the way that our bodies are affected and affect the world? What subject do we have for that? Well, there's no better subject than physical education. But it's never really been about the body so much as it's been about a biomedical body, a performing body, right? A productive body that does these things. And so that's what I want to do. I want to open up the idea of the body and think of it as a lived and relational body. Like, how does our body relate? You know, how is it lived? And so we enhance our capabilities. This is what school should do. It should enhance our capabilities to relate and to live well. And we do that through these different physical practices, right? Like juggling, running, jumping, breath work, posture work, body scans, zazen, yoga, doing analysis on where the play spaces are in our neighborhoods, doing a critical analysis on body image and things like that. For us to say that a legit PE class has this much MVPA, I think just we got to throw that out. Now, I know that's the talk that everybody wants to hear, and that's what may keep us in schools. I totally get that. But when we talk to each other about that, we should not be saying things like that. I don't know. I mean, I think I know why we worship MVPA in PE, but we shouldn't. Because then again, you're trying to make people a certain way. Oh, look, when we move them, their brain lights up. See that image right there? See the brain lighting up? Oh, if the brain lights up, it must be good. It must be good, right? Because school's about the brain. And so we'll move kids for the brain so they could do well in academics or they could behave. I think that's not what we should be for. We're so much more than that. Any other questions though? Even comments, random comments, even if it's not related to these two questions. And I'm going to stop sharing that.
Hey, Nate, this is Emily Jones. I'm in Central Iowa. Thanks for your presentation. A couple of things that you mentioned actually line up pretty close to some of the areas of interest that I'm trying to move forward to. I really liked that image of the conveyor belt. I didn't like it, but it was illustrative for sure. And that lines up so much with kind of the 20th century model of schools, which is very much workforce development. Mm-hmm. And some of the challenges with that workforce development mentality is that it isolates us as specialists. It actually isolates all educators as specialists, and it asks us to do our jobs by ourselves. So whether we're talking about physical educators being specialists, we do our jobs in our gymnasium, we keep our heads down, we do our jobs, and we help students in our classrooms specialize, and because we see talent in them, and so we specialize them further. Similarly, math educators, they're specialists and they work in their classrooms. And when they see students excel, they try to help those students specialize and become more skillful with that science, art, etc.
Right.
What limits then us as educators is if we maintain that mentality, the conveyor belt, the workforce development issue, we really prepare students in a very singular mentality, and we also isolate from the realities of our community and the social issues and the constructs that happen in our students' lives beyond that specialized component. So what I hear you say, which connects very much with like this new design away from that, is we need to be speaking not only amongst ourselves as physical educators or health educators or those who advocate for equality movement, but people who are social work specialists and psychologists and a wide, juvenile justice folks, and allow the conversation as I think the agenda that you're pushing for these ideas to allow us to redesign schooling in a way that better prepares students to be effective citizens. And I think you're kind of radical in some of your ideas, which are cool, but it's so, I think already mentioned this, it's so far from what's happening in a lot of places that it's cool to kind of see some encouragement of more collective conversations around, how can we better prepare students to be effective in life, in addition to a career or a space beyond a K-12 setting.
Right. And thank you for your comment, and I want to address it, but before I do that, I know we have to finish here, but we'll keep this open. I think the last session I went to, they were able to keep it open, and so if anybody wants to stay, you can. Oh, here comes Michael. He's probably going to say that. We'll give him a second to join in.
Hello, everybody.
Oh,
yeah, sorry, Nate.
No worries.
Yeah, I know this. I'm certain this conversation has been fantastic, and I don't want to stop it at all. So I think I've got it, so we can stay for a little bit longer. So by all means, continue on. I don't want to cut any. I'm sorry for barging in, but I did just want to let Tina out because she's going to do another session. Actually, the session that I was supposed to do had to get canceled. So by all means, continue the conversation that's happening and pretend I'm not here.
Okay, you heard him. So if you want to stick around, feel free to. I would love to have as many people in here as possible, but of course, it's your choice. So yeah, Emily, I think, you use the word community there, and then you didn't necessarily use the word relevance, but I think that's what you were alluding to essentially, is this cultural relevance in a sense. I think one way of conceiving of schools is as being for communities of well-being, right? So if you look at the Declaration of Independence, when it's talking about like all people are endowed with these inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they're saying that all people are trying to be well, right? So life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. If you talk about that happiness piece at the end, that's just well-being in a sense, because really it's hard to define these things. Like what's happiness, what's well-being. These are very hard things to define. You can't, because any word that you're going to define is defined by other words, which are defined by other words. You can never reach a final meaning of anything anyways. So something like well-being is what everybody's trying to do. Everyone's trying to be well. And you can't do it alone. Like that is our nature. Our nature is to be well, to creatively advance in a sense. But that nature must be nurtured, right? That nature must be nurtured. And that's what school's job is to sort of nurture that nature. Matter of fact, that's what democracy's job is to say, look, we're all equals and that we're trying to be well together. Let's come up with a system of government where we're equals, right? We consent, we work together. No tyrant at the top that tells you what to do. We work together. It's hard to do that, but we work together as equals to decide, where our well-being sort of inhibits somebody else's well-being, and then we fix that. We decide together. Now that's community. What that's saying is that we are communities, and we're trying to be well, not just as individuals, but as communities. So really, democracy, in a sense, is ultimately about well-being for all, because we all matter equally. While we're all different, we all matter equally, because we're all equally trying to be well, in a sense. But it depends. We're very vulnerable, so we must nurture that. And so that's what school does. School helps us nurture the ability to be well together. And so a good unit of thinking about that is a person, but a good unit is a community as well, right? So school is for people who are well, in a sense, but you can't just stop there. It's for communities that are well, and then you can't stop there either, too. The whole world, like to me, you can't go to school. Like I use this with my students. Hitler was educated, right? And if Hitler was educated, I don't want to be educated, because if you can be educated and do that, you're not educated. If you can go to the Amazon and wipe out a bunch of rainforests to make money for your company and know that it is destructive for others and the whole, and yet you claim your right to be able to make that money, I just don't see how that person is educated, because they haven't recognized the damage that it does to others and the whole, right? It's not treating others as though they're endowed with these inalienable rights as well, too. So for me, it is ultimately about these overlapping communities of well-being. Now, each community is going to be different. Each person is going to be different. So the way we do this is we have to tap into meaning and relevance. We should sit in the middle of meaning and relevance and then work together within that meaning and relevance. And it should be participatory, right? So we should decide together how to do things and where to go. Now, look, if we have in PE, if we have young students, how are they going to decide what to do next in our class? Not very well. That's our job, right? But as they get older, they can have more say in that decision-making practice. But even if they're younger, in terms of something like assessment or how they feel about something, or maybe even potential things we could do in the future, we can still incorporate voice and choice into it. But we typically do not have a participatory type of physical education or education, period. And then if you think about this, if you extend it into the greater community in terms of like the long-term athletic development model or sport or whatever, right? It tends to be this elite model. Same thing with school. Like, why is college? This is just, to me, why is college such an exclusive thing? Why does college cost so much money? Certain colleges, right? And it just, this elite model, this meritocracy that we think exists and is good, and it does more to exclude others and keep people and narrow the top actually, than it does to make us well in a sense. And so I think that participatory model where people have a big say in the way things go in their life, that needs to begin at school as well, in the PE class as well, and in youth sports outside of the community. Why do we have knuckleheads coaching kids and making them want to quit because it's about winning? That's just, I can't stand that. Like, what is the point of, let's say, sport in a society? It's well-being, right? The point of sport is well-being. People play to be well. They love it. They have fun with it. Unless we have a parent that says, play your sport to make me feel important. Or a coach that says, play this sport and play it like this to make me feel important. And then it's completely dysfunctional, which of course we know our youth model is very dysfunctional. And that's partly because our professional sport model is very dysfunctional. It's very exploitative. And we do that with kids. You know, we need them to win games. We need them to be good because people are watching me coach. People are watching me parent. And if my kid sucks or my team sucks, I suck. And so I need to yell at you and control you and dictate to you everything and make it, and I'll backwards rationalize and say that I'm teaching you life skills. I'm teaching you responsibility. And this is going to make you tougher. Like, there are ways of doing that, but you don't have to be a jerk about it. And that's what we are. And we do that in school too. We do it in school too because we need to be a good teacher. So everybody do this, move in the same way at the same time, be good at these things so I can be seen as a good teacher by my peers. And that's, I think, one of our biggest problems.
So Nate, do your students, when they leave your class and they go into society, they go back home, they go in their neighborhood, do they come back and have discussions with you, conversations with you about what they are experiencing? Because it's obviously different. There's no meaning and relevancy with a lot of their out of extracurricular activities, right? So what do those conversations look like?
That's a great question, because that's one of the best things about having students from, let's say, first grade up through sixth grade, and then doing it as long as I have. Not that I've been doing it that long, but I've been doing it long enough that I have students now. I've got a couple students that have kids, and it's really interesting when they come back and talk to me, and they often do, because we have the junior highs right down the street. And when they have when the junior high doesn't have school that day, the kids will often come to our campus and come visit me. And it's really funny, even the kids that you would consider like my toughest kids to deal with, they still come back and want to talk to me, because one of my goals is to make every kid feel at home in the class. Like, that's the number one thing. They are valid who they are. And if they're tough, they didn't choose to be that way. But what they'll do is they'll often talk to me about things that they notice about adults, the way that adults will talk to people and treat people, and especially at the junior high, the way that they dictate everything to them, and coaches that they play for, and opponents too. They'll often come back and talk to me about how, oh man, I saw this the other day, and here's what this person said, and it made me think about these things that we did in class. Because we'll talk to them about consent a lot. Like, you have the right to say no in my class. You don't have to do what I ask you to do. Now, if you say no, then we're going to have a conversation. We're going to figure out where to go next. And I may try to persuade you and coerce you too. Like, I may try to push you in that direction because I think it's important for you. But in the end, it's your right to resist or not. But I really want you to be able to tell me why. What's the problem? What would you rather do? Is there a different way that we could meet this particular need that I'm trying to meet for you? Help me out here. So what we're doing is we're encouraging them to communicate, because we really try to model respectful communication in my class. And now that I think about it here, Larry, this is one of the things that they'll come back and talk to me the most about, is how disrespectful most communication is outside of my class. The way that these people look at me when they talk to me, they'll tell me. The way that this coach looks at me when they talk to me. The way that this teacher looks at me when they talk to me. The way that my opponents looked at me when we played the game. Because we really try to work on that. Like, that is an equal. And while you don't necessarily have to take care of them, you cannot harm them. And what is it like for you when people speak to you like this and treat you like this? Does it elicit your participation or does it shut it down? And so I think they remember that stuff. And I'll tell you one major thing, Larry. This is what I think is really funny. So we tell our kids there's 2 ways that I think I know somebody's educated, and it's a joke, but it tries to make a big point. Number 1 is you don't tailgate when you drive. So to me, if you are an educated person, you don't tailgate. And that's because if you follow too closely behind somebody, you can kill the people in the car in front of you. You can kill the people behind the people in your car. It's dangerous to tailgate. Now, either people are not aware that they're tailgating for whatever reason, right? Because I've been in cars with people, they're just not aware. They're totally tailgating, and I'll just say, my God, I can't be in here with you. You're tailgating. It's making me nervous. Or thank you, Artie. Or they don't care, right? They're not aware or they don't care. And so, but either one is a problem. If you're not aware that you tailgate, that's a problem. You're endangering others. If you don't care that you're tailgating, that's a problem. You're endangering others. And there's always others, right? It's self, others, and the whole, always, never just one or the other. So for me, what we tell students is you're educated when you're aware and you care. That's what education is ultimately about, when you're aware and you care. Or at least the ideal of education there. So students will tell me, oh man, I was watching my parents, they were totally tailgating. I told them to stop tailgating. I mean, I'll get this years later. Oh, I don't tailgate. Hey, just to let you know, I don't tailgate. Now, the second thing is they don't talk when others are talking. And we sort of mention that because we have a lot of students at one time. And I forgot to tell Artie this one, our context. I see my students 2 times a week, 50 minutes at a time, 50, and there's like 100 at a time, at least between 70 and 115. And I do have like an aide with me. But so we talk about the importance of listening. Like if you're not listening or you're talking over somebody or me, it's harming. Like do no harm, right? You're harming my teaching, you're harming other people's learning. You can't do that. But teachers are the worst at this. You go into a room, there's a meeting, and teachers, one person's up there talking, and then teachers start to have conversations at their table with like a regular voice, not even whispering. And I just think, holy cow, if your students did that to you in your class, they'd be in trouble. And yet a teacher is not going to have the same kind of awareness or control or care enough in a meeting with their peers to be quiet. So to me, that's what an education is. I'm trying to impress upon them. The point of what we're doing here is we're nurturing our nature. We're taking care of each other. And if you are not aware that you can harm people, you're a danger, just like if you don't care, right? So the conversations, this is a very long way of answering your question here, Larry. The conversations that we tend to get into, they don't really center around body or the physical activity. It centers around our relationality. They come back and talk to me about how they've related and how other people have related to them. And they've sort of developed a taste for what they like and what they don't like about that kind of relationality, which I think is most important, to be honest with you. Because I think that's what our subject does better than any subject, is it can develop healthier ways of relating. Because think about how intimate we are with each other at play in games. There's often this great physical contact. It's intimate physical contact when you're playing with each other. And if we can reframe, games in a better way, they become such powerful tools for social transformation. They become such powerful tools for communities of well-being. And that's why we need to do it in relevant ways too, like with what you were saying there, Emily, this relevance in these communities, rather than saying these are all the things we must do because somebody on a hill decided we must do these things. We start in the middle of where we're at.
I have a comment and a question. I guess, sometimes early on in my career, I didn't have a clear philosophy, and I might not even have one now, but I guess it's more funneling into something that can say to someone. But I've always felt like I'm teaching life through the lens of PE. Like, does it matter to Tina if she knows how to, hit a baseball or a softball? Probably not. Does it matter to John if he can shoot a 3-pointer? Maybe not. But hopefully I'm teaching him something about how to live well. And then my question, and this might be too big for this moment, but what is your thoughts on the idea of doing away with subjects in schools?
It depends on the school and how it's situated. I think you don't have to have subjects that are completely separated, like at a secondary level where you have periods, and then you go from this class to this class to this class. But I still think that you have these subjects that that still sort of contain, key questions and ideas and tools for transformation in a sense, because obviously these things all run together, right? They all run together. And I think it depends on the context. I do think that in some ways having subjects unleashes the potential of the subjects in a sense, and in some ways they constrain them, their interconnectivity. Like, to me, to have something like social studies or history without reference to the science of the day or the physical culture of the day or whatever, it all bleeds together. But I do think that it's always a direction of attention, right? So a school subject is essentially a direction of attention, perception, and action in a sense. So like math is a language, and it's a sort of conceptual tool. It's a window into the world, into our worlds in a sense. It's a way of understanding the world, and it's a way of manipulating the world in a sense, right? But it's really it's a direction of our attention in certain ways. But same with history and same with PE. It's just a direction of attention in different ways, and it's a different sort of exercise of our embodied capabilities. And so there's value in having names for these different things because they are a different sort of direction of attention. Ultimately, there is no real separation between history, science, physical education, math, language arts. That's all part of one process of living together that you can't arbitrarily cut up and draw lines between and say, there's the difference between them, and it's just, there's the hard line. You can't really do that because that's not how life works. But we do that just so we can communicate more efficiently. So if I say something like physical education and math, you see in sort of your mind's eye, right? Two different things, don't you? And so there's value in naming these things. But if you've ever read the Tao Te Ching, the first thing it says is the Tao that can be named is not the real Tao, or the Tao, right? Whatever we want to call something, it isn't limited to what we call it. So yes, I think blending all these subjects together, because they already are at their core all blended together, is a good idea. But having distinctions between them is also useful. So it just depends on how you do that. And it depends on the context, your school, what's possible, how much time you have, how many people you have, what your resources are. So yes, there's value to doing that. Then there's also a value to not separating them necessarily, but keeping them distinct in a sense. Because again, it's like, there's different kinds of like meditation where the focus is on something, a different aspect of your experience. Like there's like a, what do you call it? Loving kindness meditation or something like that, right? There's other types too. You can call it all meditation, but it's just a different sort of focus. And you could even say something like with dance, there's different types of dance, but it's all dance, right? But to me, it's even a crime in a sense to not call basketball dance. Like if you watch Steph Curry play basketball, why isn't that dancing? Why isn't, when you play a game of basketball, why isn't that dancing? Why isn't everybody dance partners in that sense? Aren't they all moving with a sort of rhythm and there's a resonance there? To me, it's all dance in a sense, but we still split it up so we know what we're talking about, but they're not so different actually when you think about it. Was there a second question in there too? I can't remember, Peter. The school subjects one, I know that wasn't a great answer because it's kind of like it depends.
Hey, gray's my favorite color.
Right. And it's not profitable to be on the fence, is it? It's not profitable to live in the gray area. You've got to pick a side, and you've got to stake that claim and fight for it. And that's who makes it in this world, and which I think is a big shame, because things are much more complex and complicated than we tend to grant them. And if we had that sort of, which I love this term, epistemic humility, if we had more epistemic humility, I think we would treat each other a lot better. That's for sure.
I tend to agree with you. Obviously, Nate, we've had these conversations for a long time now, but I do see the benefit, in my opinion, of maybe not like the hard line, like sticking your stake in the ground and saying, okay, this is what it is because of what it is. But I certainly believe that having an intentional focus on something, if that's what you intend to focus on, is necessary for improvement or development at some level. Right? Maybe not at elementary school, right? Elementary school probably could just be one big day. And for a lot of people, it really is just one big day where subjects kind of just bleed into one another. But later on down the road, I think there is, if you want to be an engineer, you probably need to be spending some time doing engineer specific classes, and maybe music composition isn't necessarily something that you should be spending your time with. I liken it to kind of like, a strength and conditioning coach. Okay, well, we want to improve upper body power. Okay, that's great. There are specific things that we need to do to improve upper body power. But because of that, we're also going to have ancillary benefits in our core strength, in our anti-rotation, in our anti-extension. We're also going to have, our triceps might get stronger, right, as a byproduct. So I think allowing for that focus, but recognizing the inherent connections, I think that's where we need to be more intentional, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I agree. It just depends on, let's say, the age of the students, and it depends on, I think it depends on a lot of factors. But, one thing I want to say is, I think one of the biggest crimes we commit. So David Orr has a book. It's been out for a long time. It's called Earth in Mind. And one of the things he says in the book is something like, we tend to think education is a good thing, but what if it's a dangerous thing? And it often is dangerous. It actually, in many ways, makes the world kind of a worse place for people. Because if you remember back to the Lorax, the book, The Lorax, the story, the Dr. Seuss story, in one part of it, he chops one tree down at first because he wants that tuft, and he wants to make this thneed. And then he takes this super axe hacker that he builds, and it cuts down 4 trees in one chop. And so the way that he presents it, the character's name is the Onceler, like, this is great. I invented this super axe hacker. I use my great skillful skill and my speedy speed. And so we tend to just think that skillful skill and speedy speed is a good thing, but those things, skillful skill and speedy speed, can be used for really bad things. And so what we do is we keep trying to sort of, make people skilled without connecting with the larger picture. And so therefore you make all these really skilled people that are disconnected from each other, and they destroy each other with their skillful skill. That's what we do. So I think one of the biggest crimes that we commit in school is this. We have math, we have science, we have language arts, right? We have those like major things, those major core subjects. And you might spend 2 days a week or 3 days a week on PE, or maybe 2 days a week on art, if they're lucky. But you should spend 2 days a week on art and PE and math and science and history and nutrition and cooking and gardening. It shouldn't be 5 days of math. It shouldn't be 5 days of technology or science or language arts. It should be just spread throughout. We should slow the hell down, try to cover a lot less things, and do things that are relevant to what's at stake. Like, what is at stake right now is, if you watch what goes on in the school, we are not addressing what's at stake at all. I mean, so in a sense, I think school is just, it does nothing to prepare us for making the world a better place. It does everything to prepare us to just obey And to be honest with you, and you've heard me use this terminology before, but it just, we have an oligarchy, right? Plutocracy, and that we have the few wealthy people who essentially control everything. And we just go along with it. And it's because school is like that. You have the few powerful people who dictate everything and sort of make you go along with it, and make your parents go along with it in a sense too. Oh, you need to listen to them. You need to do what they're telling you, because if you want those nice things, you have to listen to them. And it's really, school is like this mechanism for what you could call neoliberal capitalism, right? It's a mechanism to synchronize our behaviors towards these profitable ends. But you see, that kind of behavior is destroying people's lives across the world, has destroyed people's lives across the world, and is going to destroy a lot more lives across the world. But we keep just like kicking the can down the road and acting like what we're doing in class is any good. When if we were self-sufficient in terms of our communities, you know, like growing food and cooking together and being together and deciding together, and can we do that in a classroom? Why aren't we cooking together, deciding together, being together in a classroom or at a school? Why aren't schools sustainable? Why aren't students running the school and voting and things like that? You know, in a school for student council, I mean, real voting, not just, you know, the ridiculous stuff in high school, but I'm talking even in elementary school. So the specialization you're talking about, Michael, I could see what you mean. It's important that if you're going to be an engineer, you need some of this specialist skill. However, that makes sense when we have a good enough, I think, background of what skill is best used for, in a sense, or like what engineering kind of might be best used for. Now, Emily, you've been writing some stuff in here. I want to read it because I read it and I want to get to that. So you say an incredible point here is the need to work collaboratively across disciplines and sectors, so vision and outcomes can be determined collectively, and then responsibly integrate across environments and social settings. And this is important so these concepts presented to learners are not in direct contrast to the reality that students experience in their communities, sports settings, other classrooms, etc. Rather, they're reinforced and become part of new systems, cultural norms, right? And then, so co-teaching and co-designing would be a really interesting next step to get towards that point. However, that co-design would require people to be cognitively flexible and be willing to admit that not one person has the right answer. So, and that's key. So this is how school damages us, because from the moment you're young, you're taught to get the right answer. Repeat back to me what this should look like. This is the right answer. Without ever telling people there is a right answer, you must think this way. That's what we're telling them, without ever explicitly saying it. And so we are not conditioned to live in the gray area. We're not conditioned to embrace complexity and ambiguity and indeterminacy and uncertainty. We are not conditioned to be like that in school ever. And so to then try to recreate a system that does all those things, I mean, that's a huge shift. It's a huge shift, and it's almost an impossible shift. That's why, like when Artie said, Nate, this sounds good, but I mean, it ain't gonna change anything, right? Because, and he's right, but at least we can change it where we're at and do our best. Like I always think the student teachers that I work with through the local university and my students, and then anybody who's willing to listen to me, that's what I can affect. If I ever am lucky enough to, you know, lie and cheat my way up to a position of power where I can just, you know, snap a finger and do something really good, then great, I'll do that, you know, and change, you know, circumstances for a lot of people with the snap of a finger, fantastic. But that's probably not going to happen. So you have to do it together. It has to be in a participatory way and kind of be bottom up. So I think what you're saying is right. But I got to tell you, when I work with people and I go talk to other teachers or even other PE teachers in the district, you know, they'll just go, no, students need to know this because they need to be college and career ready. And they have to, this is the way the world works. And they need to, and I'll say, but the way the world works, look at all these problems here. They're like, but that's just the way it is. You're not going to change that. But they just, it's like a wall talking to a wall. And it's like, how can we collaborate together when they're just, like you said, that cognitive flexibility, you know, that's not there. And the other thing is, think about our identities. Our identities are so tied into what we do and like our political identities. And rather than being open to thinking differently, we are just like, no, like I need to be right about this. And when you come at me with something different, I'm going to block it, because how dare you shake the foundations of my identity? If you shake the foundations of my identity, there goes me, right? And you can see this when it comes to religion. You know, I've been in many, many religious debates with people in the last 20-something years. And, you know, you get to a point where the conversation is really good and they admit some things. And then once I show like I show them where their views are sort of like contradictory. They suffer from these internal contradictions, right? Rather than saying, yep, I see that, they immediately at that point will play all these different games. Well, you know, and like they see it coming and they cannot shake up the foundation of their identity, because what will they be without that? And I think, Emily, this is what we got to do in school is address that. Why do you believe what you believe? How did you come to believe that? Let's talk and spend a lot of time doing that rather than learning so many things. Matter of fact, you said the word learners in there. See, I'm not a huge fan of that word. They should be called students, because we study. We study self, others, and the world, right? PE, we study, we research ourself, others, and the world. We're not just learning things, and that's what school is here. Learn this rather than studying it, right?
I emphasize an iterative process when it comes to teaching, and I teach at the university level, and there's a study out of Australia related to physical education pre-service teachers. And the majority of those teachers base their philosophy on what they had experienced coming up through the system. So when they get to university to be challenged with new thinking and innovation, it's really difficult for them, because they're going to base their career path on what they went through as a student. And my final question, and before I go, I teach at the university level phys ed, pre-service teachers. And what would be the one message, the key message that you would want to convey to them if you had that opportunity today to new teachers?
So Larry, I think I'm familiar with that research, and I think it was the group out of Monash University that might have done that. I could be wrong, but like Justin O'Connor and them, and Laura Alfrey maybe, and some of them. And I think what you do, I think when you're working with kids, and then when you're working with future teachers, so the PEAT educators, I think are crucial. That's where I think the leverage points in the system, right? The individual teachers and the PEAT educators, to me, are crucial. And then people like Michael here actually bringing other ways of thinking, other people from sort of different realms together, I think is really crucial too. We want to tap into every leverage point, but I think the biggest payoff is the individual teachers to their students, and then the PEAT educators. So what I would say is, when they come in, the first thing we have to do is ask them, what is physical education? What does that mean? And then show them the diversity in their thinking, and then ask them, what does the physical mean? What is education for? What's PE for? And just get them to answer those questions, to search and think, and then look at the diversity, and then start to poke holes. Not to say that they're wrong, but to say, why? Okay, you say, like I once had a group of PE students that I spoke with, and I said, why do you want to become a PE teacher? And they all said something like, oh, because I think it's really good for people. Something like that, right? And I said, well, do you think math is good for people, or teaching science? And they said, yes. I said, well, how come you're not teaching that then? That's really good for people too. Why this? And then, so I had to keep asking them questions. And then what they finally realized was, okay, this is an area that I like. It's meaningful to me. I'm not an athlete anymore. I need a job, right? And I think it's good for them because it's been good for me. And so just by going deeper, they realize that this is something that's meaningful to them. And then, so then I could say to them, do you think it's that meaningful to your students? Okay, no. And the people who told me something like, people need this. And then I'll say, why do they need it? Why? Okay, everybody, let's talk about this. Why do they need it? And then someone's going to say, I don't know that they need it. I know somebody who's like this, and they have a much better life than this person, and they aren't fit, they aren't healthy. And to me, that's what you do. You start with questions, and you shake the foundation, and then you build off of that. So then rather than saying, this is what you must become, this is the right way to do it, here is good teaching, we say, I don't know, what is? And then you could say, all right, but to get your credential, here's what this organization says you must do.
Yeah.
And here is a way that will help you right now. But this is not the only way, right? If we can do that, we have a chance.
Very good, Nate. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining me, Larry. It was, by the way, I have to tell you, I didn't see any faces when I was talking, so I made sure yours was there so I could at least get some of your feedback.
Right on. Take care.
Oh, you know what I forgot to do? Let me, for the rest of you, real quick, I totally forgot to do this. Let me, if you want to write this down. I forgot to do that there. You can take a picture or whatever you need to do. Michael, did you write that down? You need to figure out a way to get a hold of me.
I know how to get a hold of you. Thanks, though. I appreciate it. Just in case. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Now, Emily, have I spoken with you on Twitter before? Or are you on Twitter?
I am, but I'm a little bit of a lurker on Twitter than anything else. So
Have we exchanged anything on Twitter before? Any conversations? Have you seen me on Twitter at all?
I have. When I'm only hesitating because I looked you up while you were chatting real quick, and I was like, oh, there you go. I was trying to put a name to a space or a
Right.
One of Nate's many talents is the ability to express deep thought in that 280 characters, and he does it pretty darn well. Because I'm like, man, I want to respond, but I don't feel like I don't feel like typing on my thumbs for 500 words. But I can't. I'm not as concise as he is. So.
Well, that's where Twitter really helps me, because as you can tell by watching me this entire presentation, I can just go, because I feel like there's so many things I want to sort of get out in a sense. And so Twitter makes me take it and put it into a nice little package maybe and send it out. And Peter's on there. I see Peter on there all the time. Peter,
I don't offer as much as you do.
What's that?
I don't offer as much as you do.
I'll tell you, was it you, Peter, that shared with me the that abstract show on Play?
Yes.
That was great. Michael, you'd like that too. I think Emily, you would like it as well. But that was a great episode. That whole show was great. They had a bunch of episodes that I saw that was good. So you introduced me to that one. It's called Abstract, right?
Yeah, it's a series
on Netflix. I think it's Netflix, called Abstract, and there's some pretty interesting episodes. But one of them was on Play, and she's a toy designer, kind of like a game and a toy designer, and really a lot of her philosophy that comes through and what she was trying to do in terms of the design of the toys and the kind of aesthetic experience she was after with that was really interesting. And by the way, too, just to plug something for you all, I heard this guy interviewed I came across him on Twitter somehow. I got lucky. And then he was interviewed. I think he's written a book on it. And it's called something like games. It's about, it's on games and agency. Oh man, what's it called? But I can't remember it, but I'll have to post it on Twitter soon, because when I finish listening to the podcast, I want to recommend it to people. But keep an eye out for a tweet soon on it. But I think you'd all really like it, because he talks about how, game design, it's not about the outcome that the game designers are about. It's about the aesthetic experience that the game affords and facilitates. And to me, that's what we're kind of missing in PE and sport, in a sense, is we tend to focus on that outcome rather than this aesthetic experience. And then the kind of agency that each different approach sort of develops. And so when we have a better view about games and like maybe physical culture, and we create this sort of aesthetic experience, it enhances our agency in these ways. When we design it based on a particular outcome, it doesn't enhance agency in a sense. It sort of restricts it in a way, which I think is essentially what I've been talking about the entire time. We restrict agency rather than enhance it. But his point is that games are one of the most powerful tools for enhancing agency. And so the design of the game is about designing the experience rather than an outcome. And that's one of the shifts that we need to have more in PE, is designing for experience rather than outcome. Now, Michael, a question that I had for you, and I was hoping there'd be more, LTAD people in here. And that is when we look at the LTAD model and then people talking about a vertically aligned PE, what I wonder is, what do, let's say, coaches, trainers, LTAD people, what do they see is PE's role in that kind of model or in that kind of world? They live in that kind of world. You know what I'm talking about, right? Not to say that it's so separate, but they're doing things for kind of different reasons. Definitely more of a performance-based, kind of elite-based kind of thing. And they look at PE like, PE should be doing this. What do you think is the general view of what PE should be for those in that camp? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's a little bit tough, I think, because I do think that the people in that world that are, whether they're an NGB or an NSO or something like that, I think that they get a little bit of a bad rap, because obviously a lot of the focus for LTAD does go towards like, oh, we're going to prepare these people for the highest level of competition. But they all, not all, but a lot of them do recognize that there is that participation pathway part of LTAD. And I think that's where, in my opinion, physical education really fits in, where it's the equity, the accessibility of allowing for, vertically aligned, developmentally appropriate instruction, and that participation pathway more so than the excellence pathway, if that makes sense. But that's where I like it at, and that's in the conversations that I do have. That's where people, I think, tend to go. There's still a lot of this physical literacy conversation, and I don't know how much you got into your session about that, but regardless of what you think that is or how you feel about it, the three main components that I always refer to, the motivation, confidence, and competence, you could take physical literacy away, because I think those three things are extremely important, just regardless. So being able to develop motivation, competence, and confidence, I don't want to say systematically, but at least having some type of framework to guide that development, I think is huge. And I think that plays into the things that you talk about. And we've had this conversation before, where it's the development of, what do you say, capacities, right? Not capabilities.
Well, capacities sort of into capabilities.
There you go. Okay. So,
so let me ask you this then. When we talk about the participation pathway, and we talk about this confidence and competence, so the next question for me is, pathway toward what, or in what? Like, participation in what? And that to me is really crucial, because this is where I think our imagination is a little too, I don't know, I guess I could say weak in a sense. And in terms of the LTAD model, one of the issues that they have to sort of overcome, and there's a way to overcome it, and you and I have talked about this before, is that word athlete, right? And so we could say that everybody's an athlete, and I like that. I like saying that. I like saying to our students, everybody's an athlete, everybody here. But it does seem that in the LTAD model, if you were to just, let's scoop up 1,000 LTAD people, where are they typically coming from? They're coming from some sort of competitive or sport background. So the A tends to represent a very specific sort of conception there in this competitive or elite realm. And so we have this participation pathway. And so I see what they're doing there. They're making a concession in a sense, but it's still kind of a pushing toward, but you need to be physically active. And these are the better physical activities. These are the physical activities activities that you need to probably be more physically active in. These are the better ones. So yes, we want you to participate, but we've kind of narrowed the possibilities for participation, if that makes sense. That's one of the things that I think LTAD stuff kind of suffers from.
Yeah, well, it certainly does. And it's to me, it's a lot like physical literacy in the sense that people know the phrase and they know the definition, motivation, competence, whatever. But they haven't really read any of like the actual literature. They haven't read Margaret Whitehead's description and leading up to it. And they don't know that it's, you know, with a variety of environments and the willingness and the ability and the desire. And, you know, there's all these things, right? And it's same thing with LTAD, where people know long-term athletic development. They know it's a framework. They see the image of the 7 stages, but they haven't really read any of Bailly's work behind it. Like, it was developed by this guy and then adopted by the Canadian Olympic Committee, because they're like, oh, this is great. And so then it just got thrust from participation. Like, the first couple lines of his book is like, you know, because he's a physical activity believer, like it's important, and I'm on that boat too. And a physically active life is a more fulfilling life, in my opinion, than a sedentary life. So he talks about, like in his text, that's what the purpose really is cradle to grave, because everybody's sport goes away for everybody at some time, regardless of how old you are, regardless of what sport you're playing. But it got taken and thrust into the highest possible level of competition. And that's where it trickled down to everybody else. Where I see it much more as hey, if I get an Olympic athlete, awesome. Maybe they'll remember me and send me tickets to the Olympic Games, right? But the rest of the time, you know, 99.999% of my kids, I just want them, I want to open up doors for them to potentially walk through. I want those doors to be available. I don't want them to be windows that they just see through. I want the doors for them to be available, whatever they choose to walk through, if that makes sense. And I think that's why I like setting levels of possible success vertically, so people are doing the right thing at the right time, in my opinion.
Right. Now, so the doors metaphor is really interesting, because I think this is kind of what standards and grade level outcomes represent, in a sense, is they do represent doors. The problem is there's only like so many doors that you're presented with, right? So other doors exist, but they remain locked, in a sense. And so the teacher kind of determines what doors remain open or are available to be open, and which doors remain locked at all times or even invisible. And this is, to me,
I think the students do that too, though. I do think the students do that too, though. Sorry to cut you off.
No, I mean, look, this is why when we look at like the younger levels and we talk about sampling and then specialization as they get older, I get that. But I still think that that sampling model can remain throughout all of even secondary. And somebody could choose to do something like an elective at the secondary level. But I still think that even then, if physical education has electives at the secondary level, especially at the high school level, I still think there are things that there still has to be a decent amount of variety available for students. Now, that may be tricky depending on the place and what's relevant and things like that. And then from within, like, so wherever Peter is, like in Alabama, it may not be that, you know, all this variety works for these kids. They just would rather do these things. So you then stick with those things in a sense, but from within those relevant activities, you can still then open up practice and look at them from different dimensions. And then, so when I talked about, like, you know, how do we relate to each other here? And what does this model look like out in the world, in a sense, like in your community? How are people playing together? How are coaches coaching kids? How are kids competing? But like, what's our breathing like? You know, what's our posture like? Like, those are things that even if you had electives that are more sport-based, we can still like engage in breathing practices or posture work or things like that, like body scans. We can still look at body image. So those are all the things I think we can bring into PE, even when we have something that's kind of special. We just use that specialization to also open up other doors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're not doing snowshoeing down here.
Peter, yeah. Now you're a big soccer fan, huh, Peter?
That's a mild understatement.
Yeah. Then what about soccer where you live with kids? Is it pretty popular?
I mean, I grew up here, so I mean, it has definitely become more popular, but because of that, it's also become more professional.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 7-year-olds doing private individual training. You know, just it's funny. I mean, I love coaching, and I love the club I coach for, but there's also just some things that are just insane to me that don't seem to be age appropriate and just child appropriate. But
right. Well, you brought up something that I was thinking about recently. When we have students in our district that they are competitive athletes, like they're ice skaters or whatever it is, and they get exemptions from PE because, you know, they competed at a high level. And, or if like we're doing something like online PE, somebody will say something like a parent will say, well, they're already fit. They're already physically active. You know, they'll pass any fitness test you give them. And they're already pretty competent in this thing here. So why should they have to take PE? This is the question that parents will ask the district. And so, of course, they get exempt from PE. And I don't blame them because most of the PE sucks. For me, though, I think that just because you're a competitive athlete, you're competent, you're fit, that should never get you out of PE because that's not what PE is for. So as long as students are able to say, I'm already fit, I can do these things, I already compete at the highest level, I'm already healthy, why should I have to take PE? That's a valid question to me, I think. And especially when the PE sucks, why should they have to take that? But if PE is for something different, if it's for something larger, then I think even those professional athletes, they should have to take PE, but PE has to be so much different than like we're talking about this long-term athletic development model. One student could say, I'm already there, right? I'm already a competitive athlete. I'm one of the best in the city or in the country. Why do I need PE? And of course, we have to be able to answer that. And I don't think that we've kind of backed ourselves into a corner with the way that we present what PE is for. You know, oh, it's for fitness and health. I'm already fit and healthy. Why do I have to take it? And that's a legitimate question. And like, I don't have a problem with a 7-year-old taking lessons and wanting to be good at those things, but that kid should definitely still have PE. But I can see parents trying to get them out of PE. You know what I mean?
well, I mean, it's like you say with the whole, you know, school is for jobs. It's like once you've quote unquote attained mastery, why am I going to keep doing this?
Right. Because maybe it's not for mastery. Maybe it's an ongoing process of development and inquiry and research and relationality and all these things. But, you know, it's obviously a different kind of model of education there, which is unfortunate. But Michael,
Hey, guys,
how did it all go yesterday?
It went really, really well yesterday. It's going really well today. And that's what I was just hopping on to say. Actually, I have to hop off and I got to end this call because I need this session. We found out early on yesterday that we only have a certain amount of simultaneous calls that we can handle. And so I have to hop off this one and get ready for another one. So I'm going to have to end this one, guys. I apologize. Hopefully we can reconnect again and continue to chat.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Good seeing you, Peter. And I'll see you guys around the next couple hours here.
Yep.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
See you guys.